brief recess. Members, we have one item to take up before our 2 o'clock time certain on zoning, and that is item number 85. Item number 85 is an item from a council committee, from the Audit and Finance Committee. And so the way I think we'll proceed on this is get a motion on the floor, have a little discussion, and then I know that I think I know that there are going to be some proposed amendments to the main motion. But I think it would be best if we have a little bit of discussion before we get to those amendments, because it may help us navigate our way through the amendments. As the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee, and we also have one person signed up to speak, is my understanding. As the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee, I will move adoption of item number 85 so that we'll get a main motion. It is seconded by Councilmember Kadri. Let's go to the speaker first, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Okay, your speaker on 85 is Susan Spatero.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here.
That's right, thank you. I signed up neutral on this because I think it's a really good idea to have these rules.
I think your microphone's still off.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay. I signed up neutral on this for a couple of reasons. First, I think it's a really good idea. And I know you've put a lot of work into it, just reading through it. But I do think there are some things that are missing that you might want to consider adding or looking at. There is no question that Prop Q should have been a wake-up call, and I know it is for some of you. In my district, District 8, 78% of the people voted no. That is a very, very strong message. And a lot of times when I come here, I say, and I'm saying again, I want to speak for those who pay taxes, obey the law, work. Money doesn't grow on trees. They're the ones that have to pay for everything that you're doing, and they deserve better. All of you took an oath of office to follow the law, and I think governments in general are straying from following the rule of law. I think it's a mistake in terms of spending money or other things. So I encourage you to really pay attention to the law regarding city financing. The council speaking is inconsistent with the spending, and I think that's one of the things that really irritated voters. And, you know, the message was we don't have enough money, but in fact, you know, I don't want to pick on anyone, but in a town where theoretically 1 in 5 people are has food insufficiency, buying things with taxpayer money like artwork is not appropriate. It doesn't go with that message, and I think that's the kind of thing that really irritated people. I think that in terms of the specifics, it feels like these are, you know, I'm an auditor type, that this is like a slush fund with few internal controls. You need to get internal controls. Not only get your rules, but who enforces them and how do you know that they're being enforced?
Thank you, Ms. Spataro. We appreciate you being here and your comments. All right, members, that'll lead us to what we'll do, I think, is have some brief discussion, and then when that seems to be concluded, I'll recognize people on potential amendments. Let me start off as, I guess, kind of the author of the resolution, and I want to start by saying thank you to the council. I want to say thank you to our staff, who I've thanked them a couple of times, but they deserve it each time I speak, for the amount of energy and work they went into on this. The goals of the proposal was to, one, have a single policy that the public and council and staff would be able to use and understand. A second goal was to provide, and is to provide, more precise definitions and greater clarity on what uses of funds are permissible. This will help safeguard public confidence and offer greater clarity on permissible and impermissible use of funds. A third was to assure that Austin is more in line with what other jurisdictions do, peer jurisdictions and peer cities and other jurisdictions that have office holders that have funds appropriated to them on an annual basis. And let me just say that when we reviewed, and I should have said this just a second ago, when we reviewed the council spending policies, we found a whole lot of decentralized administrative bulletins and governing policies. And so this kind of corresponds those together and brings them together. So I want to, having said those are the three goals, I think we all really share those goals. And it's been, I'm thankful to the members and the individual members of the council who have provided the input through the Audit and Finance Committee meetings and those kinds of things to get us where we are. It seems that the one area, based upon what I'm seeing with the proposed amendments, that while there are some tweaks in certain instances, like the $50 thing that we'll talk about in a minute, things of that nature, the biggest area of disagreement that we currently might be facing, it relates to the rollover of funds. And I want to remind everybody of something I've said in the past, and that is that out of the peer cities that we reviewed before we provided even the first draft of this policy to council, out of the peer cities that we reviewed, peer cities and peer jurisdictions, only one entity, and that was the Texas Senate, allowed for a rollover of funds. And by the way, in the city of Austin, we don't have a rollover of funds because we have annual budgeting. And each year we budget, and if for some reason a department didn't spend, and let's just use a number, $100,000, during the appropriation process, they can say, well, we still need $100,000, but the reason we didn't spend it this year is this happened or that happened, and so that becomes part of the appropriation process. Currently, the city council, the mayor and council, as I know it, are the only ones that have the ability to roll over funds. And as I've pointed out, we didn't find that in other peer cities and peer jurisdictions except for the Texas Senate. And in the Texas Senate, it's capped at $20,000. As I've said before, and I'm going to say it again, if an office is appropriated money and it has money left over at the end of the year, that is either a sign of an over appropriation, we appropriated too much money, or it's a sign that something happened that year that may mean you're going to need some of that money again. But it certainly, as it builds up and builds up and builds up, it seems to be at least pretty good evidence that there's an over appropriation. And in a time where we are in a tight budget, and in a time when we're looking at how much money is actually in the general fund, that money in other departments would go back to the general fund. It would be appropriated through a process that meets the overall city needs, and it would take into account overall city needs. So we crafted this policy, I think, thoughtfully, and sought input on it, that what would happen is that the mayor and council offices would still have flexibility to address that second possibility I just talked about. By what we did is we set a rollover cap at $50,000, which is significantly more even than the one rollover that we found, which was the Texas Senate. And the additional rollover funds would then go back to the general fund to be utilized in the overall appropriation process, so that we would go through a process where we would consider meeting specific needs and we would consider taking into account citywide needs. I heard somebody use the phrase that they believed we should work to incentivize spending your money in the appropriated year. And I think that's probably true, but by the same token, we sought with that $50,000 cap a means of maybe moderating it a little bit so that an office wouldn't feel compelled or disincentivized, if you will, to just spend money, right? Because if I don't spend it, I'm going to lose it, so I'm going to spend it. So that's why we put a cap of $50,000 with the additional rollover going back into the general fund. Now, as I understand it, we're going to have some discussion about whether or not we ought to do away completely with the rollover, with the prohibition on rollover, so that we do it like we're doing it right now. It's my understanding we've got proposed amendments that would take the $50,000 cap, but put money into the district service funds that we have talked about by way of a resolution, and we have a memo that was done by the manager's office saying how that pilot would work. So in essence, some of the amendments I think have said, okay, well let's just create that district services fund, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but utilize a policy about council spending to do the district service funds. I think that ought to be done as the district service funds. We ought to have a conversation about the district service funds. We ought to have a conversation about how much money we have about that, and not let that confuse what we're trying to do in building confidence with the public when it comes to our policy. Because folks, if it's partly going to stay in the council's budget, partly going, and what's left over goes to the district service funds, that is still a rollover of all of the money. So I think if we're going to do the district service funds, what we need to do is we need to follow the memo that the manager put out. Don't do it as an add-on to this council spending policy. And keep in mind that what the resolution that led to the manager's memo said, the memo was very clear that it would require, as part of the budget process, for a determination to be made about how the money would be utilized. This amendment won't allow for that. This amendment just says it's going to go into this district service fund. It took into account equity. You know, we shouldn't have a situation where because one council office is in a position that it needs to spend its money in order to serve its constituents, doesn't have enough money to roll it over to a system benefit fund, and then another district does, and it creates continued inequities in how we're spending our money. It allowed, the manager's memo also speaks in terms of, or allows for greater transparency. We lose that, in my view, if we just conflate it as part of a spending policy. So I wanted to lay that out that way, because if one of our goals is to increase public confidence, which I know everybody shares, I think we ought to be very clean in how we go about doing this policy. And that's what we've attempted to do in what we've laid out, and that is the basis of my motion to adopt this policy. So with that, I'll defer. I'll make further comments later if need be, but I wanted to lay that out, and I will now recognize Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for laying that out. And just wanted to speak a little bit to the District Service Fund as the author of the original resolution that Council adopted in November of 2024. I was really heartened to have the topic of the District Service Fund come up during the Audit Committee a few weeks ago as part of the committee's recommendation on office spending. And really the reason why I believe it came up as a reference point was because we saw that for offices that had a significant amount of carryover dollars and they were able to appropriate those dollars back into their district via an appropriation to the Parks Department or what have you, was that council offices were using their office dollars to serve their district. So it would make sense for us to consider the previously adopted policy that council has provided as direction to the city manager as one way of us having a program specific to serving the needs of our district and allowing us that flexibility in how we serve our district, as well as ensuring that there's a public participation in the determination of those projects. I certainly welcome this conversation because this, part of us moving forward on a district service fund pilot program is that we need the funding first. The memo that the manager laid out suggested a couple of different funding pathways, but it was very clear in that we have to identify the funding first, and then we can build out the program guidelines, parameters, and talk about the dashboard and how we will ensure the public accountability. So there's still a lot of TBD in carrying out that policy. But the first part that was identified was we need to identify the funding source. So that's how we came to this connection of using any surplus in office revenues or office dollars that were unused within that fiscal year as a way to seed the district service fund. I do not see it as the only financial tool to fully implement the district service fund. And in fact, in my research of other cities that have similar types of programs and structures, they have a variety of funding sources. So I really see the office spending policy as one way, one pathway in us funding the district service program. But ultimately, what came out of the conversation was that there is a majority of us who want to see that policy move forward. It is, again, a previously adopted policy of council. I would like to continue the conversation with colleagues here and with the manager and moving forward and developing the program and guidelines, because there does seem to be a majority who want to see the program move forward. So just wanted to add that context to the program.
Good, thank you. Councilmember Laine, followed by Councilmember Velasquez.
Thank you so much. I first do really want to thank every single person who put this level of effort into developing much more clear guidance, and particularly for the mayor in leading this process, and also for the many council members with whom I have had very robust discussions about the pros and cons, and that has moved us to the opportunity for a stronger policy. I will not touch on the points that y'all have already made. However, I will reference the wake-up call, the very clear wake-up call that the vote on Prop Q was from our voters, and in addition, some of the media coverage that has been occurring around the city of Austin. And, I didn't come from government. I came from private industry. So when I set up my office a little over a year ago, I simply followed the practices that I had encountered at every other entity that I had been connected with, whether as an employee or on a board or actively running a nonprofit. I have not ever I've been connected with an entity that allows substantial rollover. So this is a first for me, and in listening to the mayor's comments, it concerns me deeply to be so far out of line with typical practice of governmental entities and private industry and nonprofits. Even PTAs don't allow rollover to the next year, and that isn't the kind of operation that has this level of money at play. And so I feel most comfortable if we have more specific, clear guidance. I believe that serves us as council members by having specific, clear guidance laid out, guardrails. It gives us something to rely upon rather than each office and each council member deciding differently what they want to do. And then the public information requests just continue and continue. I am after sound policy and clear guidance. And I really think that no matter what passes today, we will be way ahead of where we were before. But I personally have a problem with a council adopting a policy for itself that none of the rest of the city has that opportunity. And I don't think it's sound policy. And so I was very gratified to learn about the district service funds, which were passed before I was on council, which lays out a framework, a several-page, single-spaced framework for a way to handle these balances that have increased in value, not in my account, but, I hear that they have gone up. And this provides a clear, transparent process to shift to a more typical approach to accounting and financial policies while preserving the very real need that I certainly have spoke about at length on this dais of the need to have access to timely, flexible funding for district-specific projects. And I really believe that we as a council, each of us individually and as a body corporate, will be better served by more clear guidance and laying out policies that conform with what is common practice. So I look forward to the continued discussion here, and thank you for allowing me to kick this off now.
Councilmember Velasquez, followed by Councilmember Duchen.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question, and I'm not sure who can answer it. When a council member is termed out and there are funds still left in their rollover, or what was previously or what is rollover, where do those funds go now?
Yes, sir. Ed Vanino, Chief Financial Officer. When a council member terms out, those funds do revert to the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Duchen.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for my appreciation for bringing forward this policy and for giving us an opportunity to give speed and clarity to it. I really just want to reinforce some comments that have already been made and put this in context because, on the one hand, I can appreciate that the amount of money we're talking about here is in the grand scheme of the city budget fairly minuscule. So the way I'm seeing this is that this is really about values and leadership and how the council behaves and how we're perceived more than anything else. And so my observation of the last couple of weeks dealing with this is that we're incentivized in a very ad hoc way to squirrel away dollars for district priorities that otherwise we struggle to fund for whatever reasons. And I'm not sure what those are. And I understand, my seniors here, some of y'all have been doing this, and I don't know what the circumstances are, but I want to acknowledge that that's obviously going on if this is the practice. And this may, for all I understand, be going on for years for folks that have been here for some time. And per Councilmember Fuentes and others, my sense is that some sort of council district service fund, and I want to thank her for the work that she did before I ever showed up here, and that many peer cities are already using this. In fact, from my conversation yesterday with ACM Rogers, it sounded like we are fairly atypical in that we lack this kind of program, whether it's at a nominal amount or significant. And so in place of this program, we're having to squirrel away these dollars. And in these other cities, the one thing I really like about it is that the program exists in the budget. So it's transparently voted on during the budget process. And if I'm responding to the current public sentiment, that seems like a major step forward in making sure that people know what projects are funded, that we can submit projects to be voted on for approval, that there's guidelines around it, that we have controls on it, that it's equitable and accountable. And I'm just going to read it. So Houston, in their 2026 budget, said that their project, I think $5.8 million across the single-member districts, repair, maintain, and improve city assets, including streets, sidewalks, sewer systems, buildings, parks, trails, that better serve the community and anticipate further needs and prevent further degradation to existing facilities and assets. And to facilitate a conversation with constituents that captures all the considerations involved in their communities and assure all interests are addressed and reflected with the funds provided via the program. And I'm hoping that we can all agree those are all worthwhile goals, and that alongside, I think, robust controls could be a much more structured approach to dealing with this challenge. And that's been around for 10 years. And from what I can tell, been fairly successful. In fact, I think they voted a couple of times to increase those dollars and add additional controls to make sure it's not being used for kind of self-serving reasons. So the challenge, as again, Councilmember Fuentes pointed out in the memo last summer, is the lack of funding. And the memo points to two options that seem somewhat unrealistic at this point. One, a taxpayer election, the other, the budget stabilization fund. And I don't think either of those are appropriate. And I've spoken with a couple of senior city staff about some options. And my hope is that just in the next months, we can be creative about how to fund this, even in a very nominal way, but substantial enough that it finds a way to disincentivize us from turning to this other solution of squirreling money away and rolling it over and figuring out how to address district priorities in that way. So again, I'm grateful for the resolution. I'm grateful for the prior work on this. And I just want to endorse that solution as a way that, for whatever conversations happened a year and a half ago about that I think it can also address this problem that we're dealing with right now in a single policy stroke. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I might just piggyback on that just a second to talk about if we want to fund the district service fund, and I want to reiterate what I said a minute ago, there's a process for us to do that, and that is the budget process, and we can make sure that that's done in a, as the memo of the manager's office put out, when the director of the Office of Budget and Organizational Excellence put it out back some months ago, it pointed out that it could be done in such a way where there would be approved capital projects as part of what was going on. Equity would be taken into account. And if, in fact, what happens is if we pass this resolution as it's currently written, and what it says is you're capped at a rollover of 50,000, and there's extra money, the argument can very easily be made at that point in time that ought to go into the district funds that we're talking about. That is a source of funding. And I think that would be an appropriate discussion at the time of the budget. It's interesting to me that the resolution that the manager's office provided us in response, not the resolution, the memo that the manager's office provided us in response to Councilmember Fuentes' resolution, it even expressed that unexpended or unallocated funds would not be carried over to future years, in recognition that that is just not a common fiscal practice. So I really urge us to separate this discussion about district service funds. I'm glad we're having the discussion because it once again highlights, as the Councilmember Fuentes has said, it highlights the desire. But we're a long way, folks, from knowing how those funds ought to look and how you're going to put money in them and where the money is going to come from and how you're going to assure equity, how you citywide, how you're going to assure transparency, how you're going to do those kinds of things. It's great that this spawned that discussion, but this isn't about that. This is about what are council spending policies, not how we want to fund the district services funds. So I would really encourage us to step away from that. And I would encourage us to not add to the $50,000 cap on rollover and put us outside the mainstream on what that ought to be. I don't have anybody else signed up for in the queue. So with that, I'm going to go to potential amendments. And the order I'm going to go on the potential amendments is Councilmember Ellis, Councilmember Laine, and Councilmember Velasquez. And I would ask you, when those that follow council, and what I'm doing there is in the order I received them. So if anybody's asking how did he come up with that, that's the order in which I received them. What I'm going to do is ask you, as you lay it out, to be very clear if you think there's any conflict between your amendment and a previous amendment, and so that we can have a discussion about that as well. Councilmember Ellis, you have the floor.
Thank you for the recognition, Mayor, and bear with me because I want to make sure it's really transparent and clear since this is a version 2 of a version 1. So that is the sheet that I'm reading off of, and so it begins with on line item 46 and 47 of the draft resolution, that we would change that language to read, develop and provide training for new elected officials and new City Council office employees on laws, policies, and procedures relating to City Council office budgets and expenses. And then we added, and also make this training available at least annually for elected officials and City Council office employees who would like to refresh their knowledge. So this is quite similar to how we do orientation. We usually get it when we're fresh and new in our positions, but as new members are sworn in, we are more than welcome to jump in on those orientations and make sure that we have refreshers on any questions that we may have come across. And then jumping into the Exhibit A, I move to amend Exhibit A on page 4 in the general category, sub A, under permissible, add the following bullet: transfer of funds to a city department contingent upon council approval of a resolution that clearly documents the maximum amount, purpose, and recipient departments, in parentheses, of the proposed transfer. And so that helps make sure there's a transparent way in or outside of the budget cycle to make sure that we are being very open and transparent with what dollars we are allocating from our office budget to a department and specific projects. And then under subheading B, under prohibited, amend the third bullet as follows. And it says transfers of funds to other city council office budgets and strikes the language or departments. So this frees up the ability for those dollars to go to departments for specific projects. And then number 2, on page 5 in the software and IT service category, subheading A, under permissible, amend the first bullet as follows. Software and minor computer hardware may include the purchase of information technology, items like laptops, monitors, or minor software licenses such as software that the city owns, and strikes the language and not a subscription service for software, just to provide flexibility for our offices to be able to utilize software subscriptions if it's something that we see is helping our constituents in specific ways. And then my version 2 that I'm reading off of strikes any amendments I was making to subsection 3. I know there's other amendments that have been proposed that will address the language there, but for my version 2 of the motion, I'm just taking that out of version 1's amendment.
So for
Hope
clarity,
I got through that.
if I can start with that, I'm asking questions for clarity purposes.
Sure.
Is all. When you say you've struck through item 3, that is not striking in the original resolution. That
Correct.
is striking your first proposed amendment.
Our version 1 made edits to subsection 3, and so we're just going to be silent on the issue, and in this amendment, leave it as is in the original.
Fair enough. That's why I just want to make sure that there's clarity on that. So, and the second thing I want to ask you about is your motion has what I read as 3 parts to it. The first part is the amendment of lines 46 and 47 of the draft resolution. Then you have in Exhibit A, you have a Part 1 and a Part 2. And my question is, would you like to offer that as, because you haven't offered really as an amendment yet, you've described the amendment, so I'm going to ask, would you like to offer 3 separate amendments as opposed to tying all 3 of those items together with the idea that there might be some of us that might be okay with parts of what you've done here and not other parts?
Well, without knowing the appetite of other council members, I was intending for them to be moved as one item together. But if folks say they're uncomfortable with parts of it, I'm happy to divide the question.
Then I would like to ask a question on the Exhibit A, expenses by category, on page 4 in the general category. What that amendment would do is it would say that if there are funds in a city office account, a city council, mayor or city council's account, that person could send that money to another department. It would not be using the district service fund concept that we've been talking about, but instead it would allow for just a transfer from the council to another department.
Yes, and that is the way we have used it in the District 8 office, is to be able to give it to the Parks and Recreation Department. I also know the late and great Bill Spellman. I heard he had bought library books at some point, and so I think there are some specific uses where sending it to a department, as long as it's a specifically named project and limited dollar amount, is how we have used it, and I would like to continue doing that.
All right, members, now that we've got clarity, what I will recognize, I've recognized Councilmember Ellis. Councilmember Ellis has moved adoption of Ellis amendment to item number 85. It is version 2 as she has described. Is there a second? Councilmember Velasquez seconds the motion. Councilmember Siegel. You notice that my head immediately went that direction. It's going to take me a while to get used. I told Councilmember Siegel that his chastisement of me for the past 6 months, when he was sitting over there and he claimed that I never looked over there to call on anybody, I said it's going to work against him now because I'm now trained to only look this direction.
Yeah, and Mayor, I just wanted to thank you for putting me
Yeah, that's right. Councilmember Siegel.
I feel like it's going to be easy to remember where Mike is because he's on the far left.
Yeah, there you go.
My left.
Thank you, Mayor.
Now he's getting personal. So
I had, I guess, a question for the manager or his designee. Are other city departments allowed to transfer department funds to another department under the current approach?
I believe Ed's going to answer the question, but I believe only through council action can we send funds to other departments.
And just to clarify, I mean, this proposal would require a resolution, so it would be kind of in line with practices for other departments?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
By charter, any transfer of funds from one department to another would require council action.
Thank you, Mayor.
further discussion? Council, I'll say, as the maker of the main motion, that while I would be for the first part and the third part, I'm not for the transfer of funds to a city department, even in this way, so long as we are in the process of trying to figure out how to live up to the resolution that we passed with regard to district service funds. What I would prefer to see us do is deal with district service funds in a broader, more substantive approach. While it is, and I agree that what other departments can do those kinds of things, and I also agree with Councilmember Ellis that this creates greater transparency than what we've actually been doing. I would, because we have now surfaced the need for going forward with the district service funds, I think that deserves a full consideration. And so I mentioned that to determine how, just as part of how we deal with the main motion. The motion on the floor is Ellis Amendment number 1 to item number 85, as described by her, and the motion has been seconded. Yes, Councilmember Fuentes.
It might be helpful then if we divide the question on this. That way we could see specifically where everyone is at on that ability to be able to transfer to other departments. And then a question for Councilmember Ellis, is this, a question overall on the resolution itself. Should council move forward in adopting overall the resolution, this would take effect immediately or at the end of the fiscal year?
I guess that would be whatever the effective date is of the entire proposal.
This would be an immediate, there's nothing that delays the implementation of that.
Okay. And Councilmember Ellis because I'm trying to recognize that for some offices, we know that there is a significant carryover balance and that there might be a need to do that transfer to kind of, honor whatever vision that Councilmember had for their office budget. Is there any context like that we should be aware of in regards to this section if we do divide the question on this amendment?
I'm not sure I understand what the question is.
If I understand the question, this amendment doesn't do away with the cap on the $50,000. That's what she has taken out.
Right.
So if this amendment passes and nothing else passes, that just this amendment and then the main motion as then amended passes, there would be a cap of $50,000. So again, that's one of the reasons I think, first of all, I obviously believe strongly in the cap, but that's another reason I think it would be better to have this kind of discussion about how we do this as part of a district service fund complete discussion, so that we'd be talking about the ability to fund as fully as possible the district service funds.
Okay, if that's the case, and I agree with that line of thinking, I do think the district service fund needs its own, separate discussion and consideration. Are we able to split this amendment out?
Well, I would recognize that. I would recognize what you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
That's where I was heading. Yep.
I'm going to head you to straight to that amendment. Not an amendment, but the motion is made by Councilmember Fuentes to divide the question so that And the division, as I understand it, would be that parts 1, which is the top part of this motion sheet, and item number 2 down below, where it begins on page 5 in the software and IT services category, that is one proposed amendment.
That's right.
And another proposed amendment is the item 1 on page 4 in the general category, and then parts A and B. Councilmember Fuentes moves to divide the question. Is there a second? It's seconded by Councilmember Laine. Discussion, the vote will be, the first vote we will have will be on the motion to divide the question. The second vote will be then back to the motions to amend depending upon the outcome of this vote. Councilmember Laine, you wish to be recognized.
I do, thank you. I seconded the motion to divide the question because my concern is that if this amendment is the only one that passes, we would then be in a situation in which it is not possible to honor or to honor what the intent has been thus far, and as I have previously advocated for, enable, facilitate, use the structures that our city already has in place and has proposed in order for there to be a gradual transition between the two systems. So my concern would be that if this is the only amendment that passes and it's not divided, then everybody's down to 50,000, which, doesn't impact me the way it impacts the rest of you, but I value what I've heard from other members about that being an important consideration, and it's one of the reasons why I do have it built into mine. So I think dividing the question would allow for an appropriate level of voting discussion. Thank you.
Councilmember Laine. Councilmember Velasquez?
Yes, Mayor, just for clarity, I wanted to make sure that if it's approved, the 50K cap takes effect immediately?
That's the way it's currently written.
Okay. Thank you.
At the end of
Thank
the
you. All right, so the vote, yes, Councilmember Ellis, sure.
Just wanted to add on to that because I appreciate the input of my colleagues. I also will be supporting district service funds as we approach that conversation. I appreciate the mayor kind of daylighting that we don't necessarily have all those ducks in a row yet. And so there will be a gray area between if we end up not rolling over dollars and we are not putting them in district service funds, they are just getting absorbed into the larger general fund. I think it would be prudent to know what the district service fund conversation looks like and potentially revisit these conversations around giving those dollars to departments for projects through the IFC process, or otherwise figuring out how council wants to make sure that we're working through the discussion of rolling over dollars. But without that, I feel like there's a big gap in the middle of we're capping rollover, but we don't have a district service fund program set up yet, and that is going to leave a lot of projects potentially on the table in a bunch of different districts if folks don't allocate those dollars prior to getting the district service fund language formalized.
And that's a really good point. What I would say, not so much in response, but in terms of potential clarity, is that the immediate effect of putting a cap into place doesn't mean that you're going to get a call from the manager's office tomorrow to send funds. Yes, yeah. See, I knew that'd get his attention. No, we are early in the budget cycle, right? We're in January, so one of the values that I wasn't anticipating would be a value of doing a better job of our spending policy has been that it has highlighted this desire to keep moving forward. Now, granted, last year during the budget process, which would have been a time to do that, we had issues, right? Well, to Councilmember Ellis's point, it's time to maybe get on our horses and get moving on the district service fund, and nobody's taking any money away from anybody right now. We will have the opportunity. We will set the cap if we don't get our work done on the district services funds, and if our work that gets done on the district services funds doesn't include council money that might otherwise roll over, then that money would go away. But we've got time to do what it is that Councilmember Ellis is talking about. It's January, and we're a ways off on the budget process. And the manager, I think hears the desire for there to be greater discussion on that. So I just mentioned that. So here's the vote. The vote will be whether to divide the question. The vote is whether to divide the question as I have described it. So, yeah, sure. Yeah, here's the way the question will be divided. Councilmember Ellis's motion to amend will be in two parts. The first part we will take up will be the provision at the top of her yellow motion sheet that's labeled V2 and deals with the addition of the language that you see there, including making training available at least annually for elected officials, that part. In addition, that motion will include the part labeled item 2 down below, which is an amendment to Exhibit A, expenses by category table, and it's the one that says 2 on page 5 in the software and IT services category, and it deletes the phrase "and not a subscription service for software." That will be one motion to amend if the motion to divide is approved. The second motion to amend, because of the division, will be the item labeled 1. Again, it's an amendment to Exhibit A, expenses by category table, and it's labeled 1 on page 4 in the general category, and it deals with the transfer of funds to a city department. Everybody clear? All right. The part she's just taken that out of her previous motion. That's out of her previous motion. That's not anything we're voting on.
I amended my own amendment before distributing it.
Yes. And we appreciate the diligence. Good. So that's the first vote will be on the division, and then we will go back to if it passes, we will go back to the 2 essentially motions. If it doesn't pass, we will go back to the motion to amend. All those in favor of dividing the question, raise your hand. Okay, well then let me call roll. All those in favor of dividing the motion, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. There being 5 votes in favor of dividing the question, 6 votes in opposition, the motion to divide the question fails. That will now take us back to the motion to amend by Councilmember Ellis. The vote will be on the motion to amend. All those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. Councilmember Siegel, have you voted? I voted. Okay, so you voted in favor. I'm sorry, I missed that. Councilmember Velasquez, are you a no vote? No. I didn't see you raise your hand. All those in favor.
Voting yes on my amendment?
I'm sorry. Those in favor of the motion to amend, please raise your hand again. All right. There being 10 votes in favor of the motion, 1 opposed, the motion to amend is adopted. That will now take us to the proposed motion to amend by Councilmember Laine.
Thank you. And yes, I'll walk through differences.
And by the way, for the record, I voted no. The mayor voted no on the motion to amend. Councilmember Laine, I apologize. I just didn't make my record.
No problem. And then I'll just lay out the differences and that I'm proposing. So starting on page 4 in the general category under permissible, I am proposing to add a bullet point. I will correct the first two words that are on your version 2 of my amendment. Instead of gifts for, it should read expenditures to. And so I'm proposing to add a bullet of guidance that says expenditures to contractors, constituents, or nonprofits valued at less than $50 that provide a direct service to the community. Those are permissible. Again, this aligns with what I've experienced across a range of institutions. We frequently do receive, as part of being on council, decorative gifts, the ability to enter an event so that we can become more familiar with this. And so this is designed to simply provide for that, but to provide clear guidance with a number so it's easy to interpret and it protects us, as I've seen it protect others in other organizations. So that was page 4. Moving on to page 5, software and IT services under permissible. I would propose first to amend the first bullet as follows. This is almost the same as what Council has already passed as an amendment with Councilmember Ellis. I just, for the sake of clarity, also struck through such as software that the city owns, because it just didn't, for the sake of clarity, it doesn't make sense that we are permitted to buy software licenses that the city owns. So it's a small difference, but I just think it's a little bit more clear. And then under B, under the second bullet point, amend it to all software purchases should be communicated to Austin Technology Services to ensure they comply with all cybersecurity requirements and avoid duplicate resources. As I mentioned in the discussion in the Audit and Finance Committee, I really, really value the work that has already been done by our city manager and staff. It is groundwork for efficiencies that I know are going to come. But we haven't completed that task already. And my understanding is that the purchasing process can be quite lengthy currently. And I find it valuable to be able to test a software and keep them in the loop, make sure that we aren't duplicating services and that they know what we are finding is valuable. But I would like to be able to purchase it with the flexibility that a council member budget allows rather than restricting to going through that process in order to test something. And I do believe this also could, well, I'll stop there on that one. And then on pages 7 through 8, this is where I did really appreciate the opportunity to read early in this process Councilmember Ellis's proposed page 3 and very much took it to heart, but also it's not part of what's passed so far, so this is all new. Okay, so on pages 7 through 8, in the unexpended balance category under permissible, I propose replacing bullets 1 and 2 with a single bullet as follows. Any surplus above $50,000 remaining in a city-funded council office account at the end of a fiscal year shall be allocated to a corresponding district service fund as described in the July 3rd, 2025 memo responding to resolution number 20260122council, unless expressly authorized otherwise during the annual budget process. And I'll draw your attention to a couple of things here. 1, this bullet point as proposed does squarely place the rollover into the budget process. So as I listen to the discussion, this amendment still accomplishes that. I have lived through 2 budget processes in my short time on council. They are fast-moving, complex. There were many times during both of the last 2 where there was some question about specifics. And so the primary difference that this proposal gives to us is that, yes, it's still going to be discussed in the budget process. Yes, that budget process will be the final arbiter of what happens. However, we arrive with the framework in place so that this issue doesn't slip through the cracks. And as the mayor pointed out, this resolution was passed before both of the budget processes that I was a part of. The pilot program was laid out. I would say that our city manager got on his horse a year ago and laid out a pilot program. We're the ones who aren't getting on to fund it. And as someone who is new to this body and who cares very much about efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, financial controls, all of these things, I believe that it is an inefficient use of our resources to ask our staff to develop pilot programs that we then do not fund and don't make it into the process. And I do think there is value in further discussion and guidance. But I think we need to also acknowledge that this resolution passed unanimously. A pilot program has been laid out. It is not funded. If we seed the program with funds, which honestly will remain, that's a decision that remains with every council office, because we have 8 months before we reach the end of the year to even see what the rollover is at that point. If we don't seed our pilot programs with money, they won't happen. And what I heard again and again through both budget processes is that this isn't the time to fund new pilot programs. So if we, in fact, do want to fund this pilot program that was laid out a year ago, and we have a funding source available that was overlooked in the prior two budget processes of this council in this year, this is our opportunity to, one, ensure that this money doesn't just get missed as we're in the budget process, that if it is not expressly defined by then, certainly I hope not, I hope that we get more definition on the pilot program, but let's just say that it doesn't happen. There is guidance to our city manager about what to do in that case that is directly responsive to everything that our voters have been communicating to us, and we have 8 months to further flesh it out. As I've mentioned, the rollover is not a big concern to me. District 6 hasn't had an incumbent win and doesn't have significant rollover. I am literally laying this out because of the concerns that this body has raised, trying to find a compromise position that preserves what so many have said they value. And so I personally do not favor a hard stop. I prefer a gradual transition. And I will also note that our city manager looks to our votes for guidance on where his effort should be. He's already put effort in to describe a pilot program. We have now gone through 2 budget processes that aren't funding it, and we now have a discretionary possibility of seeding that program, which is what causes there to be merit in working more on it. If what we do is we request for plans for pilot programs that we can't fund, we won't fund, we don't ever choose to fund, then it's wasted work and it's an inefficient use of our resources. And I personally think that it's a very important question, and I think it's important that we provide clear guidance. And so that's why I've included this amendment here. Thank you.
Councilmember Laine moves adoption of Laine Amendment Number 1, which she's walked through. It's labeled Motion Sheet Version 2, yellow copy. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Fuentes. Further discussion on the item? Hearing none, without objection, the motion to amend is adopted.
Wait.
You want to vote no? Councilmember Velasquez, do you want to talk? Or?
If we had a motion to amend her amendment and her amendment doesn't make it on, what is the process there?
Well, is your motion, I apologize to you. I apologize. I was reading that when I first saw it as a motion to amend. So we have a motion to amend, and before I call the results of any vote, you do have a motion to amend. So I don't want to thwart you of that opportunity. So Councilmember, right now, what's on the table is Councilmember Laine's motion to amend. Councilmember Velasquez, Councilmember Siegel, will you wish to speak on her motion, or do you want to wait?
Councilmember Laine, it was a question. I'm sorry, I was a little slow.
Please go ahead. I apologize. I didn't see your.
No, I was late pressing the button. Regarding to the first item on Councilmember Laine's motion sheet version 2, and I believe that the language was updated to say expenses or payments to contractors, constituents, or nonprofits valued at less than $50. And I'm just kind of wondering that, does this allow payments to individuals, organizations without receiving a corresponding benefit to the city? Like, we're not paying for something in particular. And then if that's the case, I wouldn't mind if the city attorney would chime in on if there's any risk to that allowance.
Go ahead.
Thank you, council member. The idea was that the council member was looking for a way to streamline, for instance, if we have a heat wave and a particular nonprofit is giving out water. She wanted to be able to purchase up to $50 worth of water, give it to the nonprofit so that they could give it out. So the intent was that it always had to be a direct service to the community. So we translated that to be a public benefit, a public purpose.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so
And Mayor.
I'm going to recognize
Mayor.
Councilmember Ellis.
Sorry, thanks for keeping us on track. I had a question about the $50 limit. Does that include tickets to events, like something that you're going to a luncheon to learn more about a cause, but the ticket's $60? Is that intended with this language?
Well, it is intended to ensure that there isn't an issue as long as it's less than 50. Yes, there would be an issue if it's more than 50, but currently there's no de minimis definition in there, so at least it gets us to 50 of.
Okay.
All right, Councilmember Velasquez has a motion to amend this amendment, and I will recognize him on that.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and colleagues, I'm thankful for this discussion, which aims to provide more transparency, more guidance to our office around budgets, and an overall better policy. My item looks to amend Councilmember Laine's amendment, Part 3. The main thing my amendment does is it strikes the district service fund and allows offices to use their rollover dollars beyond the proposed cap. Councilmember Ellis, I appreciated the language you provided in version 1, so I'm leaning on that here a little bit. My motion allows our individual offices to maintain their rollover. This allows our offices much needed flexibility to deliver services and projects that serve our unique communities. While we all receive the same amount of funding, our communities have very different needs. Some examples of those are interpretation and translation services and meeting with organizations and community leaders that serve monolingual Spanish speakers and immigrants. With regard to equity, I believe each council office better understands their community's individual needs rather than the body as a whole. This amendment gives us time and resources to hear out our communities and respond accordingly with our funds. And personally, as it stated somewhere earlier, as a fiscally prudent office, District 3 is grateful to have the funds that we've saved to serve our neighbors.
The motion has been made by Councilmember Velasquez for Velasquez amendment to the Laine amendment. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Vela. Discussion on the amendment. Councilmember Fuentes.
Just want to clarify, so with this proposed amendment to the amendment, it would undo the audit committee's recommendation of having a $50,000 cap for our office budget.
That's right.
Okay. And with that, then I guess this still with the previously adopted Ellis amendment, council offices wouldn't have a need to pass a resolution to appropriate to a city department, or this allows the dollars to stay within the office budget for those interpretation services that you mentioned, Councilmember Velasquez?
The way I would interpret this, but I'll ask legal if they disagree with this interpretation, but the way I interpret this is that it would do away, by doing away with the amendment and it carrying it forward to the next year, if you wanted to transfer that to some other city department, and only if you were transferring it to a city department, would you then have to follow the Ellis amendment. That would be the one caveat to the rollover. Anything else would be, wouldn't go through, I don't believe would go through the budget process.
It would be at the discretion of the council member.
And I think that's what he argued for in laying out the motion.
To be able to fund those special projects.
Yes.
So it only would be if it goes to fund a project in your district that's parks related, then it would be necessary to bring forward a resolution.
That's the parks being one example of that. Yes, the language of Councilmember Ellis's amendment is very specific. It's transfer of funds to a city department. Contingent upon council approval of a resolution that clearly documents the maximum amount, purpose, and recipient departments of the proposed transfer. And you can also and that deals with the departments. I was reading the second part to make sure I was right about that. What Councilmember Velasquez just laid out was if he has special projects in his district, he wants the money to roll over, which, as you point out, is contrary to what the recommendation was of the $50,000. And if it's not going to a city department, it would not have to meet the requirements of Councilmember Ellis's amendment that has passed.
Okay. Well, thank you, Councilmember Velasquez, for bringing this forward. Unfortunately, I will not be supporting this item. I do believe that, in the research that was done in bringing forward the resolution and looking at how other cities handle their office budgets and understanding that we would be an outlier and not having a cap on our carryover, I'm uncomfortable with us having that type of financial policy associated with our own office budgets, especially since it's different than our city departments. So with that, I will not be supporting this amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Laine, followed by Councilmember Siegel, Councilmember Alter.
I also cannot comfortably support an amendment that allows for an unlimited rollover. I hear some of the concern around we don't have these funds fully defined already. We have more definition in the way that my amendment lays it out than we do for this. And we also have protections to help us transition from a blank check, practically, to working in collaboration with our city manager. And that, in the end, will be the most effective path, I believe. We all have different districts and different needs, and I really believe in the value of being able to impact and seed programs, but the most effective use of money is when it's following the same strategic goals. And so that process of working with our city manager, we're talking about by the end of 2 years, we would have had 2 years to work with our city manager to define how these funds would be spent, still targeted towards our district. I believe that is a more sound path. I am not comfortable being an outlier. I am not comfortable taking this level of additional privileges in terms of how money is spent versus the rest of the city and the rest of public government in Texas. And so I cannot support this amendment, but I really appreciate the discussion that we've all had, and I think that we will end up better than we were by the end of this, no matter which version passes. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Siegel, Councilmember Alter, Councilmember Duchen.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm just catching up to the definitions of the district service fund, at least as laid out in the resolution and memo. So I want to direct this question, I guess, to the manager, but is the conception of this fund that there would be segregated funds per district? Because I'm trying to understand, kind of in the situation of Councilmember Velasquez, if the Ellis amendment takes effect and a specific office has more than 50,000 and then it gets transferred to the district service fund, is that segregated by district?
Thank you, Councilman. And so should such a fund be created, it would, based on my recommendation, be segregated by district specifically, yes.
Thanks, sir.
Councilmember Alter, followed by Councilmember Duchen.
I have just a couple questions for our Chief Financial Officer, who has presciently sat at the microphone here. I just want to understand, as you read Councilmember Velasquez's amendment, and I may be restating what the mayor said, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. If this passed and the amendment that has already passed with Councilmember Ellis, so during the year, you could have the transfer of funds to a city department with a resolution. That was under Councilmember Ellis's amendment, right?
Yes.
That was under hers. I think it would technically require an ordinance, but.
Yeah. Under Councilmember Velasquez's language under Subpart A, it says that the unexpended appropriation will carry forward in the next fiscal year. unless expressly appropriated otherwise during the annual budget process. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have a resolution, but Councilmember Velasquez, for instance, could have an amendment in the budget that says, I move, move $25,000 from District 3 office to hard or to whatever, because that is an appropriation during the budget process. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're not requiring a resolution on top of a budget amendment or something of that.
The way I read it was the default is it rolls over if somebody wants to appropriate during the budget process.
Yeah. And I just want to touch on this notion about the rollover and what other departments can do and not do. Let's just look at like the Housing Trust Fund, for instance. The balance in that fund, does it roll over to the next year?
It does through the process of council appropriating the funds back to that fund.
Right. So the starting point in the budget is, and as you look at the budget, you had last year's budget. It finished with $9 million, and that's the starting point in the next. So and that's for our other funds, the code fund and whatever that fund some of our departments. Those do roll over, and we approve that in the budget.
It does, and this is the charter requirement that operating funds that aren't expended in the fiscal year revert back to the funding source from which they came. So the difference between the code compliant fund is that is the fund that accounts for the code compliance fee. The housing trust fund is a transfer from the general fund to the housing trust fund, and so it would. Without the council action, it would revert back to the general fund, but every year through the budget process, council is reappropriating that ending balance to the housing trust fund.
Okay. And when we would be, under Councilmember Velasquez's amendment, if we were in the budget process, similar to what you laid out with any of these other funds, it would have whatever district office, the starting point would be with the rollover, subject to an otherwise appropriation during the budget process.
Yes, and we currently, as part of our annual budget process, there's always a line item in there that rolls over the council funds at a departmental level. We account for it district by district, but every budget cycle recently there's an amendment from staff that rolls over those funds based upon prior council direction.
Okay. I really think this has cracked open a much larger conversation, whether district service funds, what our budgets are. I think at the budget time is when we should be looking at these questions and asking ourselves, if every office is carrying over $20,000, that should really raise the question of, are we overfunding our budgets $20,000? I don't know if that's true or not, but I think this process has highlighted the need that during the budget process, and there are so many things going on, as you mentioned, it's hard to remember all the things we need to do, but that's the moment where we need to really ask ourselves, what is the appropriate office budget, and how do we want to fund that, just like we decide how we want to fund every single department. So just want to highlight that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Duchen.
Thank you. I was just looking for clarity at kind of a higher level between Councilmember Velasquez's motion sheet and the motion that it's replacing by Councilmember Laine. My current understanding is Councilmember Velasquez is essentially returning to what sounds to me like the status quo, where we've got no limit, and we run into that problem that I felt like I tried to highlight in the comment earlier, that we're kind of incentivizing a practice of holding over money for projects. But my other understanding is that the motion that it's replacing does this, but in a different way, which is that if we do hold over more than $50,000, it's just going in a different fund that happens to be segregated for a district per the mayor, for the manager's comment, but and also that the fund doesn't exist right now. So is that
my reading,
correct?
unless one of the professional staff wants to disagree, that's the way I read it. I think you've got two buckets, if you will. You've got the Velasquez bucket, which is status quo, and I think he even said that in the layout, is pretty much the way it is, not pretty much, the way it is right now. And you would allow an unlimited rollover unless, at the time of appropriation, the council member offered up something that then the whole council appropriated in a different fashion, which happened during the last budget cycle. The Laine bucket, it says we would cap at $50,000 what's in your council budget, but anything above the $50,000 would go into a fund that corresponds to your district. Right. So in essence, it is a full rollover. It just rolls it over into a different account in the council budget.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clarify. Thank you, Mayor. And just underscoring my challenge that my sense was the goal was to try and get away from getting over $50,000, regardless of where the source of that. And either way, it seems like a challenge to me. So that's why I'm voting no on both. Thank you.
Councilmember Laine.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a little bit that it is rolling over to a different count, but it's a completely different budget, and it puts it into the zone that has already been defined by memo that aligns with previous guidance given by this council, and that facilitates a transition towards spending that meets the needs that we see as council members and hear from constituents, and the city manager sees from his broader view of the entire city. And it encourages us to start working in a more effective manner towards the strategic goals, and allows our staff to work more efficiently by following through on prior guidance, gradually adding additional guardrails as we transition to a more effective and efficient system. So again, obviously we'll follow the will of this body, but just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you. All right, so the vote is on the Velasquez motion to amend the Laine proposed amendment. So I want to get back to where the vote is. It's the Velasquez motion to amend the Laine motion. All those that are in favor of the, unless you want to wrap up, okay. All those in favor, you want to say something?
I did. I just wanted to say thanks to the amender. I know this is not an easy conversation, and a lot of us are utilizing our office dollars in different ways simply because we have all different constituents and needs for our districts. And so I think this has been a really healthy conversation. I think folks are really working toward trying to find a workable medium somewhere in here between current practice and the district service fund conversation.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to echo Councilmember Ellis's that, and especially folks that have been on the dais for some time have managed their office budget in a certain way to achieve a certain goal. Again, everybody has their kind of own approach and what they want to do, but I appreciate that. I respect that. I've seen these rollover funds go to very good, uses, whether it be, again, library books or swing sets or whatever the case may be, and I think we kind of have a backwards way to kind of do the district funds right now, and I'm open to change in discussion, but I do support Councilmember Velasquez's amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Vela. All right. For those that are in favor, of the Velasquez motion to amend the Laine amendment, please raise your hand. Favor of Velasquez's motion. Yes. Those opposed, raise your hand. Those abstaining. There being 6 votes in favor, 4 votes opposed, and 1 abstention. The 4 in opposition are the mayor, Fuentes, Councilmembers Fuentes, Duchen, and Laine, and Councilmember Siegel is in abstention. The motion to amend carries. So that will now take us back to the Laine motion to amend as amended. Any discussion on that? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm sorry, I just, that category, the first amendment 1 on the page 4 in the general category, I just want to understand that a little bit more. The language kind of pops out to me as a little problematic. And is this the language, the gifts for contractors, constituents, or nonprofits valued at less than $50? Am I looking at the right?
It's expenditures for, the way it reads is expenditures to contractors, constituents, or nonprofits valued at less than $50 that provide a direct service to the community.
No, would be
that would be permissible.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
All right, there being no, Councilmember Laine. All right, there being no further discussion on the Laine motion to amend as amended, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Yes, Councilmember Harper Madison.
Amend as amended with the language not saying gifts, saying expenditures contract.
Well, that's just, yeah, it's expenditures too, but the amendment was the Velasquez amendment that got put on top of it. It is, when I say amended, it is the Velasquez amendment.
The one we just got.
Yes. All right, raise your hand again if you're voting for the Laine motion to amend as it was amended. Please raise your hand if you're voting no. Raise your hand if you're abstaining. Raise your hand if you're abstaining. Okay. Well, somebody, right? Councilmember Harper Madison, how are you voting?
Yes.
There being 8 votes in favor of the Laine motion to amend as amended, 2 in opposition, that being the mayor and Councilmember Duchen, and 1 abstention, the mayor pro tem, the motion to amend is adopted. Members, that will take us back to the main motion. The main motion is the motion I made sometime a week ago. That's just a joke, just a joke. The main motion was my motion as that motion was amended now by Councilmember Ellis's motion to amend and Councilmember Laine's motion to amend as amended by Councilmember Velasquez. Is there any discussion with regard to what we're voting on? Yes, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you, colleagues. Just really appreciate the conversation that we had today, and thank you to our chair of our Audit and Finance Committee for bringing this forward. And certainly, this is a priority for council to adopt guidelines and criteria for how we manage and spend our office budget dollars. I just wanted to talk about specifically the district service fund, since it has been incorporated at this time with the amendments in establishing and providing initial funding for that fund. That I want to continue working with the city manager to develop guidelines and a parameter of how we administer the district service fund. And I think that work needs to continue, and it's appropriate for us to have it at a later time. But just want to elevate that piece of implementation of that policy will need to be discussed at a later date.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Members, let me just say, as the maker of the main motion, and I want to say thanks again to all of you for your participation, and those of you that came to the Audit and Finance Committee. We have significantly improved the policy related to council spending and their office budgets. I do believe that, and as you can tell by my votes, and I do believe that it's a mistake for us to not put a cap on the rollover, and I think I'm not going to be able to really explain why Austin is different from the rest of the world on this, why we are exceptions to the rule, and I'm going to have some difficulty describing what goal that achieves, particularly in terms of transparency and accountability and equity and good fiscal discipline. I think that is a mistake at a time when we're working very hard to restore confidence. It wasn't very long ago that, in part because of questions about council spending, the voters gave us a clear signal. So I'm disappointed in that. I think we had better ways to achieve the goals that you all and we all want to achieve. But that being said, I want to say congratulations if the vote goes the way I think it's getting ready to go, on the fact that we have a much improved policy, and I think going forward it is one that we can point to with confidence. So with that and without further discussion, all those in favor of the motion as amended, but let me just ask, is there anyone wishing to vote in opposition or to abstain? Without objection, the motion the main motion as amended is adopted. Congratulations, everybody, and thank you.